Good afternoon, good morning, depending on when you're watching this. We are recording this Detroit Lions free agency special on Tuesday. It's about 12:30. Tomorrow is the official kickoff to signings, but all sorts of deals and stuff already in place. We're going to start today's Lions draft special, talking about who's still here, who's gone, who we want here, and who we could see end up with the team between now and the draft. I'm joined by Local 4 Sports' Hobie RT. What's up, buddy? Welcome.
What's happening?
Click on Detroit's Derek Hutchinson. Thanks for joining us.
Yep.
And click on Detroit's Ken Haddad.
Go
Welcome.
Lions.
Go Lions, indeed. We didn't have to take too much of a break from the Lions then before we could get back into the swing of things, right? So we got free agency underway now. So the Lions have had two signings so far as at this time. Both, edge rushers, Matthew Betts and Marcus Davenport. Davenport, obviously, a little bit more impactful of a signing. Graham Glasgow re-signed. Tracy Walker out. And also yesterday, the Lions made a trade for cornerback Carlton Davis from Tampa Bay. So, guys, Hobie, let me start with you. Who is currently not signed on the Lions who you think could come back or you want to make sure comes back before the beginning of next year?
For me, it's a 1A and a 1B. CJ Gardner Johnson and then Josh Reynolds. Whenever you look at CJ GJ, the way he missed so much time last year, and you saw how he responded whenever he played in the last 4 games of the season, he had 2 picks, and he was just such an emotional piece of that team in the preseason and all throughout the season, actually. And then you look at what he was able to do in the playoffs. I think that he would be a vital piece. And also, Josh Reynolds had one of the best seasons of his career. That's familiarity with Jared Goff, too, from their time back with the Rams. I think that he's a good signing, too. Or do you think, if you're the Lions, can you upgrade at the wide receiver position? I think that might be a sneaky position that they could address here in free agency or maybe even the draft, too.
Yeah, I definitely think the draft will be a viable spot for that, but do they need somebody a little bit more of a veteran to add to that core if you're coming back with, just JMO and with St. Brown? So we'll see. We'll get back. We'll dive more into the wide receiver conversation coming up. Derek, over to you. Who do you want to see come back who's currently not re-signed, if anybody?
Yeah, honestly, I put together like a this would be the perfect offseason for the Lions story right after the season ended. And the only guy I said they really needed to resign was Graham Glasgow. Not that Graham Glasgow is some great difference maker, but I don't think you want to go into the offseason needing to replace both starting guards. I think it was pretty clear that they weren't going to bring back Jonah Jackson because of all the re-signings they need to do and all the extensions they're going to have to work out in the next 18 months. So really, maybe some smaller signings like bringing back Matt Nelson or Dan Skipper just for the offensive line depth. We saw how valuable it was to have some of those guys this season because of all the injuries you're inevitably going to go through on the O-line. But, CJ Gardner-Johnson, I'd be okay if they brought him back. The Lions are pretty good at safety. But CJ Gardner-Johnson does have some versatility. He can play in coverage a little bit. So I would support that. Josh Reynolds, like Hobie said, he was a good player. Somewhere where I would like them to upgrade a lot is in that receiver spot. Maybe that happens in-house with Jameson Williams sort of having a normal offseason for the first time. But personally, I think they could re-sign none of their own remaining free agents and still have a really productive offseason.
Yeah, I think you kind of hit it on the head there with Graham Glasgow and how important it is to keep that line intact. And like you said, you're not going to be able to keep everybody. It's just not affordable. So for them to be able to keep him and the fact that he can play multiple positions is definitely very important to that offensive line. Ken, anybody we haven't mentioned?
Honestly, like Derek was saying, like the in-house list of remaining free agents is underwhelming. I think if they lost everyone on that list, they'd be fine. They're just kind of like depth guys for the most part that they can probably replace pretty easily. I'd like to see them bring back Anthony Pittman. I thought he offered some good depth on the linebacker in the linebacker core, and honestly, I'm pretty sure I saw that they were looking to bring him back, so that's probably going to happen. And then, yeah, I think it just really comes down to, are you going to bring back Josh Reynolds or not? And there's a lot of pretty, interesting wide receivers in the market right now that they could, I think, might be an upgrade. But again, that chemistry is hard to build, so we'll see.
So let me give you a couple names real quick that you guys didn't mention that I thought maybe I'd hear. Kendall Vildor Anybody think he may return? Currently not signed, correct?
From a depth perspective.
Yeah. Seems like a guy maybe we
think-
want. Go ahead.
I
Derek.
think Kindle Vildor and you know, some of the guys that we've mentioned are more likely to sign once sort of the bigger issues have been addressed, because I think the Lions probably aren't worried about being able to find a replacement for someone like Kindle Vildor. Like, you can probably plug in 10 or 12 guys who are out there right now. So I would expect those deals to maybe get done after the dust has settled a little bit on some of the bigger names on the market.
All right. All right. Well, let's talk real quick about some of the signings that have already happened. So we don't need to address certain free agents because they're already off the market, right? So I think one of the big ones that maybe Lions fans were looking for, and before, let me step back. A guy I think we may have been looking for before signing Marcus Davenport would have been Danielle Hunter, and now that Davenport has been signed, Hobie, do you see the idea that they would also maybe still go after Hunter, or do you think they go in different directions from here?
So let me get you right. You want both of the Vikings defensive ends that they were hoping to have last year.
Well, I wanted Hunter, got
Yeah.
Davenport, so
I think that if you go out and get Marcus Davenport, you're not going to get Danielle Hunter too. I just don't see that. Granted, I could be completely wrong because the Lions do have money to spend, but I think that money could be better spent elsewhere in free agency. You look at the interior part of the defense. I'm curious as to what's going to happen with Marcus Davenport, though, because I believe it was 2019. He had his best season with the Saints, but he's a guy who struggled just to stay on the field. In Minnesota last year, he played in only 4 games dealing with an ankle injury. And I don't think he's played more than 15 games in a season his entire career, dating back to whenever he was drafted by the Saints. If he can be healthy, he could be a great piece to pair alongside Aiden Hutchinson, because whenever he is healthy, he is good. I just think he was drafted very high, and there were so many expectations for him coming out of the draft that he never really lived up to it. But this could be a nice reset for him if he can get on the field and stay on the field.
Brad Holmes does this, right? Like, he just goes out, he finds these guys that want to prove something, gives them a 1-year deal. Maybe it works out, maybe it doesn't. It's low risk. You know, they're not spending enough money. They're not spending a lot of money on that. I will say, Brad Holmes, what we've learned from him is that he's not going to go out and offer some giant contract to a free agent. He's just not going to do it. He's going to build through the draft. He's going to, find these second tier guys that maybe they can develop into something. And he's going to take a lot of low risk contracts in free agency. So I honestly wasn't surprised that he didn't go after Danielle Hunter. I mean, maybe they had conversations and all that, but it wouldn't really fit the Brad Holmes way that we've learned so far, during his tenure.
It's interesting.
Ian,
go ahead, Derek.
Sorry, I was just gonna say, you wanted Grey Goose and you got Svedka, right? Like,
Yeah,
you wanted
exactly,
Danielle
yeah.
Hunter,
Yeah.
and you got Davenport. But
Cool.
Ken and I were
cool.
talking about the same thing yesterday as all these big signings were announced. Like, just watching the Lions and how they've operated over the decades, I didn't feel like the Lions were getting left out yesterday. As these big names were getting these huge contracts, it wasn't like, dang, I wish the Lions would do that. I was kind of like, yeah, let those teams pay, a guy $100 million, let them pay Brian Burns $100 million and see how that works out for them. Because I think we've seen so much more often than it works out. We've seen like a Trey Flowers type deal or something like that. So I think we've seen enough of Brad Holmes to realize, like Ken said, that this is the way that he operates. He isn't going to blow several hundred million dollars in free agency. He's going to try to pick and choose his spots.
Some of the guys who are off the market right now, and these guys necessarily wouldn't be Lions, somebody the Lions would go after, but they, probably may affect the Lions. Kirk Cousins obviously gone in Minnesota. He's in Atlanta now. You've seen running backs kind of be shuffled all over the league. We've got I sent a tweet out this morning that says, it's 2024 and David Montgomery is in Detroit and DeAndre Swift is in Chicago and Aaron Jones is now in Minnesota. So not sure what's going on with the NFC North, but this year has been, all sorts of kind of crazy on the running back trades. Joe Mixon got traded this morning to Houston. Saquon now in Philadelphia. So, and breaking news, it looks like Derrick Henry is going to Baltimore. So that's interesting. So
feels like a
very,
good fit.
very interesting. Thanks, Bob, for that, holding that up. Yeah. So again, running backs kind of crazy. We've seen how the value of running backs has kind of changed, but because they are still big names, I think, it does make kind of an impact. Do any of these running back shuffles matter to you as a Lions fan specifically?
I think Aaron Jones going to Minnesota, especially with the question mark that they have a quarterback going into this season. I know they traded for or they signed Sam Darnold supposedly as their bridge quarterback potentially in the future, but he was a playmaker with the Packers. I'm surprised because yes, they went out and got Josh Jacobs, but you look at their stats throughout the last couple of years and they're eerily similar because they both catch out of the backfield. I think that if you give a running back who can catch, who they can get creative with in the passing game, to pair alongside TJ Hawkinson, to pair alongside Justin Jefferson, I think that that could be dangerous depending on who they do have playing quarterback this season.
Derek, Ken, any worry on
I'm not
seeing these
worried about it.
guys?
I'm not worried
Yeah.
about it, man, because the Lions rush defense, elite. Elite. So any running back they throw at them, I think they'll be able to handle it. That was like one of their strongest spots last year. They shut down I think every
Everybody,
single
it's
like star
incredible.
running back last year.
Yeah.
And Aaron Jones, Josh Jacobs, these guys are on the back end of their careers, I think, and that's why they're moving around so easily. That's why teams are, running backs are so expendable right now, and they're just moving all over the place. So it's just a big musical chairs thing. I'm not really too
Yeah.
concerned about it.
It's fun.
Yeah,
It's kind of fun to talk about the big names, right? But
there are a few like real difference maker running backs in the NFL, but for the most part, a lot of the guys that switch spots, it just doesn't really move the needle for me. Like, did the Packers upgrade that much over Aaron Jones? Maybe a little bit,
no,
but
like a downgrade. Maybe.
in the NFL, if there's a position that I really don't care that much about in free agency, it's honestly probably running back. And it was really nice to see all these big money deals being thrown around there and know that the Lions have probably a better tandem than any of them for less money.
Yeah, maybe the best backfield in the NFL, at this point, in 1-2 punch. All right, so I want to go around and get everybody's thoughts on if there is a free agent still out there who you would like to see, and the Lions add. Hobie, why don't we start with you?
To
And
add
maybe it's
someone,
not a
sorry,
specific
I didn't
person.
hear. I didn't hear what you said.
That's
To
right.
add
So,
someone?
yeah. So, is there anybody still available that you would like to see the Lions
Defensive
specifically sign?
interior. I know we were talking. I know Ken was mentioning how run defense was so good last year. I still think that you need to really anchor down the middle. DJ Reader, who played for the Bengals the last couple of seasons, he's been really good. But Sheldon Rankins, he was a force the last 2 years. He played for the Texans last season, the Jets before then, and he played a lot of football. He was able to stay on the field. I think you pair him alongside Aleem McNeil, and you have a great tandem. I know we were talking about two great pass rushers. You put two great pass rushers and then two great anchors in the middle of the defensive line. I think that the Lions could be really potent because a lot of times it depends on how much pressure you can generate or how you can stop the run. If you can win in the trenches, I think the Lions, if they can add anywhere on both sides of the ball, defensive line, interior.
Derek?
Yeah, I think the Lions still have a couple pretty clear needs in my mind. I would like to see them add more of a proven Josh Reynolds type receiver. Maybe it is as easy as bringing back Josh Reynolds, but I think that needs to be addressed in some way. Other than that, a couple smaller number guys, because I think that that's where Brad Holmes going to go. Maybe somebody like, and I know you guys are going to give me the Michigan guy label, but someone like Josh Uche, who had 11 and a half sacks 2 seasons ago for the Patriots and has proven to be a pretty good edge rusher. He's the kind of guy that the Lions have had some success just plugging into obvious passing downs and getting a nice sack total out of them. And then I think guard is something that maybe would be better addressed in the middle of the draft. But if they wanted to go after somebody like Evan Zeitler, he's an older guy, but he's a veteran and he sort of fits the mold of this offensive line. I think any of those little holes that you can patch in for agency just gives you more flexibility in the draft, and you're less susceptible to the unpredictability of how it plays out around you.
Ken, anybody we haven't mentioned?
I definitely, Josh Uche was definitely on my list. I think that would be an awesome signing. He's 25, like he's got a lot of upside. Patriots are not a great situation right now, so maybe he wants to, he's not from here, but maybe he can come home You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
otherwise, like I'd like to just see them pick up another wide receiver. I really would. Just somebody, just a playmaker. There's a bunch out there. Like I think like, you know, Curtis
Yeah.
Samuel's out there, Calvin Ridley's still out there, and who knows if somebody's gonna
Yeah,
take a
so
flyer
that's
on
where I wanted to
him.
go next was receiver. So why don't we just start with you, Ken?
Yeah,
Calvin Ridley seems like kind of like the biggest name, but like you said,
yeah.
there are other guys out there.
Well, it seems like teams are kind of waiting around for Calvin Ridley. I'm not sure what his situation is. He could be a guy that, you know, gets one of those short-term deals, like a prove it deal, because he's had some issues in the last couple seasons. But like there's a lot of like playmaker guys that are just still out there kind of lingering that I think would add a lot of offensive, you know, firepower to the team. And they need some more wide receiver depth. I mean, we're gonna really see what they think of JMO after this draft because let's see what that wide receiver room looks like. If they really believe in JMO, they're not gonna add a bunch. But I don't know. I just think they're still missing somebody there. Tyler Boyd's out there. Like there's some guys. T. Higgins. No, I'm just kidding. That's not happening.
Maybe.
That'd be a big trade.
That would be a big trade. So here, I'll give you the list that NFL.com has as the top 10 available wide receivers. And we may be talking about guys who are a little deeper on this list, but so Gabe Davis and Darnell Mooney, they've already signed. So that gives us and Kendrick Bourne also re-signed with New England. So Calvin Ridley's out there available, Marquise Brown, who to me kind of seems more of like your St. Brown kind of guy anyway. So you can have two of those guys. Curtis Samuel, KJ Osborne, OBJ, Tyler Boyd, and Michael Thomas. So those are that's who they have as their top 10 available, wide receivers going into free agency. Any of those guys, Derek, stand out as like the guy, we have to go get this guy? Even beyond Josh Reynolds, maybe?
Yeah, it's not like a big standout list of names, obviously, but like, I don't know, KJ Osborne is someone that I've liked in the past. I think he would be a little bit of an upgrade. But the deal that I have in mind is sort of like when DJ Chark was here for a year. I think the Lions brought him in for like one season to kind of fill a gap, and I think it worked. He was a pretty reliable Josh Reynolds type. And it was a short-term deal, so the Lions weren't locked into anything. And when you think about Lions in free agency, wide receiver is one of the very few positions where they've had a lot of success, honestly, because they've like you think about Golden Tate, he was an obvious success. You think about Nate Burleson was a success. The first time around, Marvin Jones was a huge success. So like the Lions have really kind of done well picking up these free agent wide receivers, but I specifically would like them to get sort of more of a Calvin Ridley type. We don't need Amon-Ra St. Brown is a unique receiver. He's not a downfield guy. He's a catch and yards after catch guy. And I don't think you want to clog up the field with another one of those. I think you want somebody who can kind of take the cap off. And like I said earlier, I mean, maybe Jameson Williams eventually becomes that guy, but if you don't have him, then that really limits your offense.
And Ian, a lot of the players that you were mentioning, they kind of fit that Amon-Ra St. Brown type mold. You look at Tyler Boyd, that's what he did for Cincinnati for years before Jamar Chase and T. Higgins got there. I think Calvin Ridley would be a good addition to any team in the NFL. But again, going back to what you guys were saying earlier about defensive line and overpaying for somebody with Brad Holmes, I don't know if he's willing to spend that much money on a guy like Calvin Ridley because he was good for Trevor Lawrence last year. But do you really need to spend that money there, or can you address that in the draft? I think that they need someone more like a big body type receiver, not to come full circle like you two earlier with the Michigan guys, but what about Keon Coleman? Looking deep in the draft, that's a guy that maybe you could pick up late second round, third round, that can add to that type of physical, taller receiver that could replace Josh Reynolds' position on the offense.
Sign me up for that.
Yeah, is there any worry though that adding another young guy to that room, with already having to kind of bring JMO along, is that what a team that's trying to get to the Super Bowl needs to do? Add another young receiver?
Out of all the veteran options that we were talking about, Josh Reynolds fits it best from a familiarity standpoint, from a potential contract length and amount standpoint, and veteran familiarity. You add it all together, and that makes the most sense to me.
another factor that I want to throw in there is that I think the Lions are going to give Amon-Ra St. Brown an extension either this offseason or maybe during the season or something next year. And that's going to be a huge extension. So I don't think they're going to want to be tied up in 2 big wide receiver contracts.
Makes sense.
We were talking about 2024 being relatively quiet for free agency. Look at next season.
Yeah.
That is going to be very interesting for this team, which also kind of magnifies the need that the window is now.
The window is now. I think that'll be the theme as the off season goes on.
Yeah, the top 2 items on my perfect offseason to-do list were extend Penei Sewell, extend Amon-Ra St. Brown this offseason, because next year you're going to want to be looking ahead towards guys like Aiden Hutchinson, because you don't really want them to actually hit free agency if you can avoid it. So.
All right, fellas. Well, I know we got to get back. We all have other jobs we got to jump on. Ken Haddad has already started a free agent tracker on clickondetroit.com, so make sure that you are following that throughout the rest of free agency. We're gonna get this posted as soon as possible so you can enjoy the rest of this, and then you know, throughout the off season we're gonna be coming back to you. We got the draft here in Detroit, so we'll be amping up and getting ready for that. I want to thank everybody. Anybody have any kind of closing thoughts on free agency before we get going?
Let Brad cook. That's it.
Let Brad cook.
Yeah, I mean,
Perfect.
I have a whole rant but I'm not going to give it all. But you know,
Not
Lions
today.
fans are
Yeah.
the same. They're the same ones who wanted Chase Young at the deadline. They were so mad when the Lions didn't get Chase Young at the deadline. And Chase Young stinks, and he stunk for the 49ers, and they gave up like a mid-round pick for him. So if you're hollering because the Lions haven't been super active in free agency, you don't know anything. Brad Holmes is a really, really smart GM, and he's gotten the Lions to this point. So just
And
let
Brad
him
we
work,
trust
him.
You're only saying that, Derek, because of where Chase Young went to school.
Can't confirm or deny those reports, but all I know is that he stunk and they hated him by like a month in.
My closing thought would be shore up the trenches, get the other guard spots set up, shore up the interior defensive line, and I think that would be a successful offseason continuation for this team.
All right. I appreciate it, fellas. We'll talk
right.
again soon, and thanks for checking out the Lions then. Peace.